Black entrepreneurs' risky investment yields life-changing returns. Walter's hands trembled as he stared at the financial report. The numbers were worse than he could have imagined. $3 million, nearly his entire retirement fund, was on the verge of vanishing. The modern glass-walled office suddenly felt suffocating despite its expansive view of downtown Oakland. Outside, foghorns moaned across the bay, a fitting soundtrack to the disaster unfolding before him. "This can't be right," Walter whispered, his voice cracking. At 62, he had spent a lifetime building his security, and now it was crumbling between his fingers. Aisha Johnson stood across from him, her usually confident posture now diminished. The innovative community tech hub she had founded, the one Walter had invested everything in, was facing bankruptcy. "Walter, I know how this looks," Aisha said, desperation edging her voice. "If you pull your investment now, 40 people lose their jobs tomorrow. Everything we've built for the community disappears." Walter slammed his fist on the desk, sending papers flying. "You told me this was a sure thing. My wife and I were supposed to retire next year. Now what are we supposed to do?" The weight of his decision crushed down on him. Had he thrown away everything on an impossible dream? "I trusted you," Walter said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I believed in your vision." Aisha stepped forward, her eyes glistening but determined. "And I still believe in it. Walter, I need just 72 more hours. That's all I'm asking." Walter looked at her, the anger in his chest mixing with something else, fear. Behind Aisha, the framed photo of him with Diana, his wife of 35 years, seemed to stare back accusingly. What would he tell her? That he had gambled away their future? 3 days, Walter finally said, his voice hollow. "And then I'm done." As Aisha nodded and rushed from the room, Walter sank into his chair, the weight of potential ruin pressing down on him. How had it come to this? But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 6 months earlier when Walter Thompson was celebrating 40 years in business. The summer sun poured through the windows of Thompson Electronics, the small repair shop Walter had built into a successful chain of electronics stores across Northern California. The walls were decorated with photographs spanning 4 decades, from a young Walter standing proudly outside his first tiny storefront in 1983 to recent images of his expanded empire. 40 years, Walter said, admiring the anniversary cake his employees had surprised him with. "Never thought we'd make it this far." Diana, his wife, squeezed his hand. Her warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners, a map of their shared journey etched in laugh lines. "And to think your father said you were crazy to quit IBM." "He sure did," Walter chuckled, remembering his father's concern when he'd left a stable job to open his own shop during the recession. "Said I was throwing away security." Their son James, now 30 and working as the company's operations manager, cut a slice of cake. "Well, Grandpa would be proud now. Thompson Electronics survived while the big box stores are shutting down." Walter nodded, though a nagging thought had been following him lately. Surviving wasn't the same as thriving. The business was stable but stagnant. With retirement approaching, Walter had been considering his legacy. What would he leave behind besides a chain of stores that would likely be absorbed by some corporate giant after he retired? "Speech," called Marcus Williams, Walter's oldest friend and business advisor, from across the room. The small crowd of employees gathered in the break room joined in the chant. Walter raised his hands in surrender. All right, he cleared his throat. 40 years ago, I had a simple dream to build something of my own, something that would last, something that would matter." He paused, feeling the weight of unfinished business. "We've weathered recessions, the dot-com crash, and a pandemic. We adapted from repairing record players to selling smartphones. But what matters most isn't what we sold, it's the community we built." As Walter finished his speech to applause, Diana noticed the hint of melancholy in his eyes. Later that evening, as they drove home in their Cadillac, the same model Walter had promised to buy Diana back when they were newlyweds watching Dallas on television, she placed her hand on his knee. "Something's bothering you," she said. It wasn't a question. Walter sighed. 40 years, Di, and what have I really accomplished? Sure, we've made money, we've put James through college, we've got the house. But what difference have I made? My father marched with Dr. King. Your mother was one of the first black nurses at Oakland General. They changed things." Diana watched the familiar streets of their neighborhood pass by, the same route they'd driven for 30 years. "Not everyone's purpose is to change the world, Walter. You've employed people, you've been honest, you've helped customers. But is it enough?" Walter asked as they pulled into the driveway of their comfortable 2-story home in the Oakland Hills. "I'm 62 years old. If not now, when do I make a real difference?" The question hung in the air between them as they entered their home, unanswered. 2 weeks later, Walter sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports when Marcus knocked on his door. At 65, Marcus had been Walter's friend since their college days at Howard University. While Walter had pursued business, Marcus had gone into finance, eventually becoming Walter's most trusted advisor. "Got a minute?" Marcus asked, his tall frame filling the doorway. "For you, always," Walter replied, grateful for the distraction from spreadsheets. Marcus sat down, adjusting his glasses. "I've been looking at those investment options for your retirement fund. Conservative route would give you about 4% annual return, nothing exciting but stable." Walter leaned back in his chair. "And the alternatives?" "Well," Marcus hesitated, "there's a tech startup looking for angel investors. Higher risk, but potentially much higher reward." He slid a folder across the desk. "They're calling it Renaissance Hub. It's a technology education center and business incubator focused on underserved communities. The founder is impressive Aisha Johnson. MIT graduate, worked at Apple for 5 years before starting this venture." Walter opened the folder, scanning the business proposal. "A tech hub in East Oakland." The neighborhood had been struggling for decades, though there had been signs of revitalization in recent years. "The idea is to create pathways into tech for kids from neighborhoods like the one you grew up in," Marcus explained. "Plus support for local entrepreneurs. They've got a solid business model combining education, co-working space, and technical support services." Walter studied the photograph of Aisha Johnson, young, confident, with intelligent eyes that reminded him of his niece. "What's the catch?" "It's high risk," Marcus said frankly. "They need significant capital to renovate the old community center they've purchased. If it fails, you could lose your investment." Walter continued reading, something stirring inside him. The proposal outlined programs that would teach coding to neighborhood kids, provide technical training for adults seeking career changes, and offer resources for local entrepreneurs. It was exactly the kind of impact he'd been yearning to make. "How much are they looking for?" Walter asked. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "You're actually considering this? I showed it to you because I thought it might interest you personally, not as a serious investment." "How much, Marcus?" "They need $3 million to get fully operational. But Walter, that's nearly your entire retirement fund. I can't recommend—" "Set up a meeting," Walter interrupted, a decision crystallizing in his mind. "I want to meet this Aisha Johnson." The following week, Walter pulled up outside a large, dilapidated building that had once been the East Oakland Community Center. The neighborhood had changed since his childhood, but the challenges remained: limited opportunities, underfunded schools, and businesses that had abandoned the area decades ago. As Walter approached the entrance, he saw a group of teenagers hanging out on the steps. They eyed him suspiciously. A well-dressed older man in an expensive car was usually either a cop or a real estate developer, neither welcome in a neighborhood facing gentrification pressures. "Can we help you, sir?" one of the boys asked, his tone making it clear that help wasn't what he was offering. Before Walter could respond, a voice called from the doorway. "He's here to see me, Deshawn." Aisha Johnson descended the steps, extending her hand to Walter. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. I see you've met our unofficial security team." The tension broke as Deshawn and his friends laughed. "We're just looking out, Ms. J," Deshawn said before the group moved aside to let Walter pass. "They're part of our pilot coding program," Aisha explained as she led Walter into the building. "Deshawn's already built a functioning app that helps local residents find affordable, fresh produce in the neighborhood." Inside, the building was a contradiction. Parts were run down with peeling paint and outdated fixtures, while other sections had been transformed into modern workspaces with computers and people busy at work. "It's not much to look at yet," Aisha admitted, "but we've been operating on a shoestring budget for 2 years. The programs work. We've placed 15 people in tech jobs and helped launch 7 small businesses. What we need now is scale." For the next hour, Aisha led Walter through the building, introducing him to instructors, students, and entrepreneurs using the limited facilities. Her passion was evident in every explanation, every introduction, every future plan she described. "This used to be the gym," Aisha said as they entered a large open space with a basketball hoop still hanging from one wall. "We envision this as our main innovation space: workstations, meeting areas, presentation space. The bones of the building are good. It just needs renovation and updated infrastructure." Walter noticed how people's faces lit up when they saw Aisha. There was genuine respect and affection there. It reminded him of how his employees had looked at him in the early days of his business, when the mission had still felt personal. "And here's our server room," Aisha continued, opening a door to reveal a small closet with modest equipment. Currently, we're piggybacking on the city's internet infrastructure, but with proper investment, we could become a technology hub for the entire community. As they completed the tour, they settled in what had once been the center's office, now serving as Aisha's headquarters. A makeshift desk held a high-end computer, and the walls were covered with plans, schedules, and photographs of success stories. "I'll be direct, Mr. Thompson," Aisha said, sitting across from him. "We need significant investment to make this vision a reality. We've applied for grants, approached traditional investors, even tried crowdfunding. But most investors want faster returns than we can offer, and they don't value the community impact as part of the ROI. Walter studied her. "And why do you think I'd be different?" Aisha smiled. "Because I did my homework. Thompson Electronics has always operated with a community focus. You offer technical training to your employees. You've maintained stores in neighborhoods other retailers abandoned. Your business model suggests you value more than just profit." Walter was impressed by her research. "And the return on investment. We project breaking even within 3 years with modest profits after that," Aisha said honestly. "The real return comes from what we build, a sustainable engine for community development and wealth creation. We're not a charity, Mr. Thompson. We're building an ecosystem." Walter thought about his conversation with Diana about legacy and making a difference. "I need to think about it," he finally said. "It's a significant investment." Aisha nodded. "Of course, but if I may," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "This isn't just about money. It's about believing that these kids deserve the same opportunities that kids in Palo Alto take for granted. It's about building bridges over the digital divide instead of letting it become a permanent chasm." As Walter drove home that evening, Aisha's words echoed in his mind. The passion he'd seen in that rundown building reminded him of his own early days, the belief that he was building something that mattered. When he arrived home, Diana was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the radio playing an old Earth, Wind, and Fire song that took Walter back to their dating days. "How was your mysterious meeting?" Diana asked, stirring a pot of her famous jambalaya. Walter sat at the kitchen island, loosening his tie. "Interesting. Remember how my dad was always talking about giving back to the community, about how integration wasn't just about being allowed in the door, but about bringing others along with you?" Diana turned, spatula in hand. "Walter Thompson, what are you thinking of doing?" Walter explained Aisha's vision for Renaissance Hub, watching Diana's expression shift from concern to curiosity as he described the potential impact. "It sounds wonderful," Diana said when he finished. "As a donation." "Not a donation," Walter corrected. "An investment." Diana put down the spatula. "How much of an investment?" Walter hesitated. "$3 million. The silence that followed was broken only by the bubbling of the jambalaya. Diana turned off the stove and faced her husband fully. "Walter, that's almost everything we have for retirement." "I know. We've spent 40 years building that security." "I know that, too." Diana studied her husband's face, seeing something there she hadn't seen in years, excitement, purpose. "You really believe in this, don't you?" Walter nodded. "I think it could be important, Di, not just for the community, but for us, for what we leave behind." Diana sighed, turning back to the stove. "I want to meet her, this Aisha Johnson, before you decide anything." The following Sunday, Aisha joined Walter and Diana for dinner at their home. James was there too, having insisted on being part of any discussion about such a significant family investment. The tension around the table was palpable as they began the meal. "So," Diana said as she passed the roast chicken, "Walter tells me you want $3 million of our retirement fund." Aisha met Diana's gaze directly. "I want to partner with someone who understands the vision of what we're building, Mrs. Thompson. The amount is what we need to fully realize that vision." James leaned forward. "And what guarantees can you offer that this investment won't disappear into a failed venture? $3 million is a lot of money." "No guarantees," Aisha said honestly. "What I can offer is a solid business plan, 2 years of successful pilot programs, and my absolute commitment to making this work." Diana watched Aisha carefully. "Tell me about yourself, not the business, you. Where did you grow up? What drives you to do this work?" For the next hour, over Diana's cooking, Aisha shared her story growing up in East Oakland with a single mother who worked 2 jobs, discovering her talent for computers at a community program similar to the one she now ran, the scholarship to MIT, and her decision to return home to create opportunities for others. "I could have stayed at Apple," Aisha explained. "Good salary, stock options, prestige. But I kept thinking about Deshaun and thousands of kids like him. Brilliant minds with no on-ramp to the opportunities I had." As the evening progressed, the atmosphere warmed. Diana shared stories of her career as a high school English teacher, the challenges she'd faced, and the students she'd helped guide to college. By dessert, Diana's famous sweet potato pie, the conversation had shifted from interrogation to collaboration, with James suggesting potential partnerships with Thompson Electronics for internship opportunities. Later, as they said their goodbyes at the door, Diana pulled Aisha aside. "You remind me of Walter when he was younger. Same fire, same belief that you can change things." Aisha smiled. "That's quite a compliment." "It's also a warning," Diana added. "That fire can burn you if you're not careful. If Walter decides to make this investment, it won't just be his money on the line. It will be his heart, too." After Aisha left, the family gathered in the living room for what James called the official Thompson family investment meeting. Diana made coffee while Walter spread the Renaissance Hub business plan on the coffee table. "Well," Walter asked, looking at Diana. She sat beside him on the sofa. "She's impressive. Reminds me of my mother, practical idealism, she used to call it." James remained skeptical. "Dad, I understand wanting to give back, but this is your retirement we're talking about." "This is high risk." "Life is high risk, son," Walter replied. "I took a risk opening that first store when you were just a baby. Everyone told me I was crazy then, too." "That was different," James argued. "You had experience in electronics. You knew the business." "And Aisha knows technology and this community," Walter countered. "Sometimes you have to trust the person as much as the plan." Diana placed her hand on Walter's. "If you really believe in this, I'm with you, but I have one condition." "Name it," Walter said. "You stay involved, not just writing a check. If we're investing in this vision, you become part of making it happen." Walter smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's exactly what I was hoping to do." 2 days later, Walter met with Marcus to initiate the investment process. Marcus's office at Williams Financial Advisors was meticulously organized, with certificates and awards lining the walls, evidence of a career built on careful calculation and risk management. "You're really going through with this," Marcus said, disbelief evident in his voice as Walter signed the transfer documents. "I am," Walter confirmed. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I've known you for 45 years, Walter. You've always been the cautious one. Remember when we were 20 and I wanted to road trip to California in that beat-up Volkswagen van? You were the one who insisted on having the engine checked first." Walter laughed at the memory. "And good thing I did, or we'd have broken down in the middle of Kansas." "My point is," Marcus continued, "this isn't like you. $3 million into an unproven venture in a struggling neighborhood." Walter considered his friend's concern. "Maybe it's time I wasn't so cautious. We're not getting any younger, Marcus. At some point, you have to ask what it's all been for." Marcus sighed, pushing his glasses up. "I hope you know what you're doing, my friend. I've run the numbers every way possible, and I can't make them work in your favor." "Some things can't be captured in a spreadsheet," Walter replied, signing the final document. As spring turned to summer, Walter found himself spending more and more time at Renaissance Hub. True to his promise to Diana, he had become actively involved in the project, offering business advice to the entrepreneurs in the incubator program, and sometimes simply listening to the teens in the coding program as they shared their ideas and dreams. The renovation was progressing rapidly. The old gym was now filled with construction workers installing electrical systems capable of supporting a modern tech infrastructure. The classrooms were being transformed with new equipment, and the facade of the building was being restored to its mid-century modern glory. One afternoon, Walter sat with Deshawn in what would become the main innovation space, looking over the business plan for the young man's app. "The idea is solid," Walter said, scrolling through Deshawn's presentation on a tablet. "But you need to think about scalability. If this works in East Oakland, could it work in West Oakland? In Richmond? In other cities with food deserts?" Deshawn nodded, taking notes. "Ms. J said the same thing. She thinks I should pitch to investors once we've got 6 months of user data." Walter smiled. "Smart woman, Ms. J. Can I ask you something, Mr. T?" Deshawn said, using the nickname the teens had given Walter. "Why are you doing this? Most rich folks don't come around here unless they're buying up property to flip it." Walter considered the question. "I grew up not far from here on 82nd Avenue. My father owned a radio repair shop. When I was about your age, the neighborhood started changing. Businesses closing, opportunities drying up. My father always said our community needed people who would invest in it, not just take from it." "So it's like giving back?" Deshawn asked. Walter shook his head. "No, it's investing forward. There's a difference. Giving back is charity. Investing forward is believing in potential." As summer turned to fall, Walter's optimism began to fade. Despite the impressive physical transformation of the building, Renaissance Hub was facing significant challenges. The renovation costs had exceeded estimates by nearly 30%, eating into the operating capital. Key partnership agreements that Aisha had been counting on were delayed by corporate bureaucracy, and enrollment in the first official training programs was lower than projected. Walter began spending more time at the hub, trying to help Aisha navigate the growing problems. He drew on his decades of business experience, making calls to contacts, revising marketing strategies, and reworking budgets late into the night. Diana noticed the toll it was taking. One evening, as Walter reviewed financial projections at their kitchen table, she placed a cup of tea beside him. "You're working harder now than before you semi-retired," she observed. Walter rubbed his eyes. "There are some unexpected challenges." "How unexpected?" Diana asked, her tone making it clear she wanted the truth. Walter hesitated. "The costs ran higher than anticipated, and the revenue is coming in slower." Diana sat across from him. "Walter, are we in trouble?" He reached for her hand. "Not yet. It's just going to take longer to see returns than we thought. These things happen with startups." But as the weeks passed, the situation grew more concerning. A major technology company that had committed to providing equipment and technical support pulled out of the agreement. 2 key staff members left for more secure positions elsewhere. And then came the real blow. The city announced budget cuts that eliminated a workforce development grant that would have provided nearly a quarter of Renaissance Hub's first-year operating budget. In early November, Walter sat in Aisha's office after hours, both of them staring at spreadsheets that told an increasingly worrying story. "We need to face facts," Walter said finally. "At the current burn rate, we'll be out of operating capital by January." Aisha nodded, her usual energy dimmed by exhaustion and worry. "I've been talking with other potential investors, but no one's willing to commit until we show better numbers." "It's the classic catch-22, Walter said. "We need success to get funding, but we need funding to achieve success." Aisha closed her laptop. "Walter, I want you to know that whatever happens, I appreciate everything you've done. Most investors would have walked away weeks ago." "I'm not most investors," Walter replied. "But I'm also not made of money. Diana and I have our future to think about." The drive home that night was one of the longest of Walter's life. He had believed so strongly in Renaissance Hub, in Aisha's vision, in the difference they could make. Now he faced the very real possibility that he had jeopardized his and Diana's retirement security for a dream that might not survive. When he arrived home, Diana was waiting up for him, a rarity given how late he'd been working. One look at her face told Walter that she knew something was wrong. "Marcus called," she said without preamble. "He saw the latest financial reports you shared with him." Walter sank into his armchair, suddenly feeling every one of his 62 years. "Diana, just tell me how bad it is," she interrupted. Walter couldn't meet her eyes. "If things continue as they are, we could lose most of the investment. The project is in trouble." Diana was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but tight with emotion. "When you wanted to make this investment, I supported you because I believed in your judgment. I've stood by you through every risk you've taken, Walter, but this time you need to protect what we have left." "You're saying I should pull out," Walter said, the words heavy in his mouth. "I'm saying we can't afford to lose everything at this stage of our lives," Diana replied. "We've worked too hard for too long." That night, Walter barely slept. He thought about his father, who had taken a chance opening that radio repair shop in a time when black-owned businesses faced enormous obstacles. He thought about the kids at Renaissance Hub, about Deshaun and his app, about the potential that might never be realized. And he thought about Diana, who had trusted him with their future. By morning, Walter had made his decision. He would give Aisha 1 more month to turn things around, but he needed to protect what remained of their investment. It wasn't the outcome he had hoped for, but it was the responsible choice. When Walter arrived at Renaissance Hub that morning to break the news to Aisha, he found the building buzzing with unusual activity. Aisha was in the main innovation space, directing a team of people setting up equipment. "What's happening?" Walter asked, confused by the scene before him. Aisha turned, her face alight with excitement. "Walter, I've been trying to call you. The most amazing thing has happened." Before she could explain, the front doors opened, and a tall, distinguished man in his 70s entered, accompanied by several younger associates. Walter recognized him immediately, Howard Mitchell, the legendary tech entrepreneur whose software company had been one of the first black-owned businesses to be valued at over $1 billion. "Mr. Mitchell," Aisha said, crossing the room to greet him. "Thank you for coming. Let me introduce you to Walter Thompson, our founding investor." Mitchell shook Walter's hand firmly. "Mr. Thompson, Aisha has told me a lot about you. Seems we share an interest in developing tech talent in underserved communities." Walter was speechless. Howard Mitchell was a personal hero, a pioneer who had broken barriers in Silicon Valley decades before diversity became a corporate buzzword. Mr. Mitchell visited yesterday after his granddaughter, who's in our youth coding program, showed him her project, Aisha explained. He's interested in forming a partnership. For the next hour, Mitchell toured the facility, asking detailed questions about the programs, the business model, and the challenges they were facing. Walter watched in amazement as the tech legend engaged with students and staff, his interest clearly genuine. Finally, Mitchell gathered Walter and Aisha in the conference room. "I like what I see here," he said without preamble. "It reminds me of the community center that gave me my first access to a computer back in 1968. That changed the trajectory of my life." Aisha and Walter exchanged hopeful glances. "My foundation has been looking for the right project to partner with in Oakland," Mitchell continued. "We focus on creating sustainable pathways into technology for underrepresented communities. Renaissance Hub aligns perfectly with our mission." Walter felt a surge of hope. "What kind of partnership are you proposing?" Mitchell smiled. "A matching grant. My foundation will match your initial investment, providing an additional $3 million in funding over 3 years. We'll also provide technical resources, mentorship, and access to our network of industry partners." Aisha gasped. "Mr. Mitchell, that would be transformative for us." "There are conditions," Mitchell added. "We need to see operational improvements, better financial controls, more rigorous metrics for measuring impact, and we'd want board representation." "All reasonable," Walter said, his mind racing with the possibilities this partnership presented. "One more thing," Mitchell said, looking directly at Walter. "We believe in having skin in the game. If you're pulling back your investment, we're not interested." Walter felt the weight of the moment. Just minutes ago, he had been prepared to begin withdrawing his support. Now everything had changed. "Mr. Mitchell," Walter said carefully, "my commitment to Renaissance Hub remains absolute." After Mitchell left, promising to have his team draft a formal agreement within the week, Aisha turned to Walter. "You were going to pull out, weren't you, before Mitchell arrived?" Walter couldn't deny it. "I was concerned about the direction things were heading. Diana and I have our retirement to consider." Aisha nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I know, and I wouldn't have blamed you." "But Walter, I believe this is the turning point we've been waiting for. Mitchell's foundation doesn't just bring money, it brings legitimacy, connections, expertise." Walter wanted to believe her, but caution tempered his optimism. "It's certainly a game changer, but we still have to address the operational issues that got us into trouble in the first place." "Agreed," Aisha said. "And I've been thinking about that. You have decades of business experience that we need. How would you feel about taking a more formal role here, not just as an investor, but as Chief Operating Officer?" The offer caught Walter by surprise. "COO? Aisha, I'm supposed to be retiring, not starting a new career." "Is that really what you want?" Aisha challenged. "Every time you're here working with our entrepreneurs or mentoring the kids, I see how energized you are. This gives you purpose, Walter, and we need your expertise." Walter couldn't deny the truth in her words. The months he'd spent at Renaissance Hub had rekindled something in him that had been dormant for years, a sense of purpose, of building something meaningful. "Let me talk to Diana," he said finally. "This would be a big change of plans." That evening, Walter and Diana sat on their back deck, watching the sunset over the Oakland hills as Walter explained the dramatic turn of events. "Howard Mitchell," Diana said, impressed. "I used his company's software when I was teaching. He's the real deal." "He is," Walter agreed, "and his support could make all the difference for Renaissance Hub." Diana studied her husband's face. "But there's something else, isn't there?" Walter took a deep breath. "Aisha has asked me to come on board as COO to help put the operational systems in place that will make this sustainable in the long term." "COO?" Diana repeated. "Walter, that's a full-time job. What happened to our plans, the traveling we talked about?" "Finally having time together after all these years of you building the business." "I know," Walter acknowledged. "It's not what we planned, but being at Renaissance Hub these past months, it's woken something up in me. I feel useful there in a way I haven't felt in years." Diana was quiet for a long moment, watching the colors change in the sky. "You remember when we were first married, and you would come home from that tiny little shop so excited about some new repair technique you'd figured out or some customer whose problem you'd solved?" Walter nodded, remembering those early days vividly. "You stopped talking about work like that years ago," Diana continued. "The business got bigger, more complicated. It became about spreadsheets and profit margins instead of people and problems." "It's the natural evolution of business," Walter said. "Maybe," Diana agreed, "but it changed you too. These past few months, even with all the stress and late nights, you've been different, more like the Walter I married, more alive." Walter took her hand. "What are you saying?" Diana turned to face him. I'm saying that maybe our retirement plans need to evolve too. Maybe instead of cruises and golf, your path is helping build something important, and maybe mine is finding my own next chapter alongside you. You'd support me taking this role?" Walter asked, surprised. "On one condition," Diana said, a glint in her eye. "Renaissance Hub needs an education director to design curriculum and build relationships with schools, someone with 30 years of teaching experience and connections throughout the district." Walter's eyes widened. "You," Diana smiled. "Why not? You're not the only one who's not ready for rocking chairs, Walter Thompson." The following week, Walter and Diana met with Aisha and her team to formalize their new roles at Renaissance Hub. The mood was celebratory but focused, with everyone aware of both the opportunity and the challenges ahead. "With Mitchell's Foundation on board and your expanded involvement," Aisha said, addressing the room, "we have a real chance to create something extraordinary here, but we need to be strategic, disciplined, and adaptable." Walter nodded. "First order of business is getting our financial house in order. We need better systems for tracking expenses, more realistic revenue projections, and a clear path to sustainability. And we need to strengthen our educational programs," Diana added. "I've already reached out to former colleagues in the district about creating a formal partnership for student referrals and curriculum alignment." As the meeting continued, Walter found himself energized by the collaborative problem-solving. This was different from running his own business. Here, he was part of a team working toward a shared vision, each bringing unique strengths to the table. Over the following months, Renaissance Hub underwent a transformation that was about more than just the renovated building. With Walter's operational expertise, Aisha's visionary leadership, Diana's educational acumen, and the Mitchell Foundation's resources and connections, the organization began to stabilize and grow. The tech training programs expanded, now with clear pathways to internships and jobs through Mitchell's industry connections. The business incubator attracted more entrepreneurs as word spread about the success of early participants. Deshawn's app launched officially, attracting attention from community organizations in other cities facing similar food access challenges. By spring, Renaissance Hub had become a model for community-based technology education and entrepreneurship. Visitors from other cities came to learn about their approach, and a feature in a major business magazine highlighted the unusual partnership between a young visionary, a seasoned entrepreneur, and a legendary tech pioneer. 1 year after Walter's initial investment, Renaissance Hub held a formal grand opening celebration. The once dilapidated community center was now a gleaming hub of technology and innovation, with state-of-the-art facilities and programs running at full capacity. The main innovation space was filled with community members, students, entrepreneurs, and supporters. On a small stage at one end of the room, Aisha addressed the crowd, with Walter, Diana, and Howard Mitchell seated behind her. 1 year ago, Renaissance Hub was an idea in danger of failing, Aisha began. Today, we're a thriving reality. We've trained over 200 people in technology skills, launched 15 new businesses, and created 47 jobs right here in East Oakland. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. "None of this would have been possible without one person who took a chance on us when others wouldn't," Aisha continued, turning to Walter. "Walter Thompson didn't just invest money in Renaissance Hub. He invested himself, his experience, his wisdom, his belief in what we could become." Walter felt a lump in his throat as the room erupted in applause. Diana squeezed his hand, pride shining in her eyes. "I'd like to invite Walter to say a few words," Aisha said, gesturing him to the podium. As Walter stood before the gathered community, he saw familiar faces, Deshawn and his friends, now employed as coding instructors for younger students, entrepreneurs whose businesses were growing with support from the hub, staff members who had weathered the difficult early days alongside him and Aisha. "A year ago," Walter began, "I made what many considered a risky investment. Some called it foolish. Others called it generous. The truth is, it was neither. It was selfish." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. "Yes, selfish," Walter continued with a smile. "Because at 62 years old, I was looking for something meaningful to do with the next chapter of my life. I was looking for purpose, for legacy. What I found here was so much more than that. I found community. I found renewal. I found a future I never imagined." Walter gestured to Diana, who beamed back at him. "My wife and I were supposed to be retiring. Instead, we've embarked on the most rewarding work of our lives, and the return on that investment can't be measured in dollars." He paused, looking out at the gathered community. "My father used to quote Dr. King, who said, 'Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?' Renaissance Hub is our answer to that question." And the dividends it pays in opportunities created, in lives changed, in communities strengthened, those dividends will continue long after we're gone. As Walter concluded his remarks to thunderous applause, he felt a profound sense of contentment. The journey had been uncertain, the risks real, the challenges significant. But standing here now, witnessing the transformation not just of a building or an organization, but of individuals and a community, Walter knew that his investment of money, time, expertise, and heart had yielded returns beyond anything he could have imagined. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and celebrated, Walter found himself standing with Aisha near the entrance, greeting community members as they arrived. "Did you ever imagine we'd be here a year ago?" Aisha asked. "When things were at their darkest," Walter shook his head. "I had my doubts, but you never wavered." "That's not entirely true," Aisha admitted. "The day Howard Mitchell showed up, I was at my breaking point. I'd been up all night trying to figure out how to tell everyone that we might have to shut down." "Really?" Walter was surprised. "You always seemed so confident." Aisha smiled. "Part of leadership is projecting confidence even when you're terrified inside, something I think you know a thing or two about." Before Walter could respond, Deshawn approached, accompanied by an elderly woman leaning on a cane. "Mr. T, this is my grandmother, Eliza Washington," Deshawn said. "She wanted to meet you." Walter shook the woman's hand gently. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Washington. Your grandson is quite remarkable." Eliza Washington studied Walter with wise eyes that had seen decades of change in the neighborhood. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said, her voice strong despite her frail appearance. "Not just for what you've done for Deshawn, but for what you're doing here." "I'm just one part of a team," Walter said modestly. "Maybe so," Eliza replied. "But I've lived in this neighborhood for 67 years. I've seen programs come and go. I've heard promises made and broken. What's different about this place is that you put your money where your heart is, and then you showed up to do the work." Walter was moved by her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Washington." "My late husband used to say that there are three kinds of people in this world," Eliza continued. "Those who take, those who give, and those who invest. The takers leave places worse than they found them. The givers help but often burn out. But the investors, they plant seeds for trees whose shade they might never sit under." As the celebration continued around them, Walter thought about Eliza's words. A year ago, he had been worried about his legacy, about what difference he had made in the world. Now, looking around at Renaissance Hub, at the students learning skills that would change their futures, at the entrepreneurs building businesses that would create jobs and wealth in the community, at the partnerships forming that would sustain and grow this work, he understood that legacy wasn't something you left behind when you were done. Legacy was something you built every day through the choices you made and the seeds you planted. Diana joined them, slipping her arm through Walter's. "Penny, for your thoughts." Walter smiled at his wife of 35 years, the partner who had supported every risk and celebrated every success. "I was just thinking about returns on investment." Diana followed his gaze around the room, understanding immediately. "I'd say this one paid off pretty well. Better than we ever imagined," Walter agreed. As the evening wound down, Walter found himself standing with Aisha and Howard Mitchell, looking out over the main innovation space where the celebration was still in full swing. "What's next for Renaissance Hub?" Mitchell asked. Aisha's eyes lit up with the visionary energy that had first inspired Walter's investment. "We've proven the model works here. Now I'm thinking about how we scale other neighborhoods, other cities." "Ambitious," Mitchell commented with approval. "We've already had inquiries from community leaders in Richmond, Vallejo, and even as far as Los Angeles," Walter added. "People want to know how they can replicate what we've built here." "And what do you tell them?" Mitchell asked. Walter thought for a moment. "That it starts with believing in potential in people, in communities, in possibilities, and then backing that belief with resources, expertise, and commitment." Mitchell nodded. "A good investment strategy for business and for life." As Walter drove home that night with Diana beside him, he thought about the path that had led them here, from his concerns about legacy a year ago to the vibrant, purposeful work that now filled their days. The investment had been risky, the journey uncertain, but the returns had transcended anything he could have anticipated. "What are you smiling about?" Diana asked, noticing his expression in the dim light of the car. "Just thinking about how different our retirement turned out to be from what we planned," Walter replied. Diana laughed softly. "Who would have thought we'd be busier now than when you were running Thompson Electronics? But I wouldn't trade it for all the cruises in the world." Walter reached for her hand. "Me neither. It turns out the best investment I ever made wasn't in stocks or bonds or even in Renaissance Hub." "What was it then?" Diana asked. Walter squeezed her hand. "Investing in possibilities. In potential, in the belief that we can make a difference no matter what stage of life we're in. As they pulled into their driveway, the home they'd shared for decades looked different somehow, not just a place to rest after a lifetime of work, but a launching pad for a new chapter of purpose and impact. "You know," Diana said as they walked to their front door, "we never did get around to taking that trip to Paris we always talked about." Walter put his arm around her shoulders. "There's still time. Renaissance Hub is stable now. We could take a couple of weeks in the fall." Diana leaned into him. "I'd like that, but I'm also looking forward to the new coding program for seniors we're launching next month. Mrs. Washington has already signed up and she's recruited half her church." Walter laughed. Who knew retirement would be this full of possibilities? As they entered their home, Walter thought about how his definition of success had evolved over the past year. Once measured in profit margins and store locations, it was now gauged by the light in a student's eyes when they mastered a new skill, the pride in an entrepreneur's voice when they landed their first client, the transformation of a community reclaiming its potential. The investment had been risky, but the returns in purpose, in impact, in legacy were beyond measure. And in the end, that made all the difference. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.